You remember Highway to Heaven? I used to love that show. If you've never seen it, think Touched by an Angel, only the leads are a couple of fellas instead of a couple of ladies. And also, it's a lot better. Not because of the fellas instead of ladies thing, that's just a coincidence. It's more of an overall quality issue. And if you've never seen Touched by an Angel either, I don't know what to tell you. It's Charlie's Angels, but with literal angels, and Charlie is God. There. It's not a complicated premise. Actually, if you've never seen Highway to Heaven, the best thing to do, if you're interested, is to just watch it, which you can easily do, because it's currently streaming on about 100 different platforms. And look, there are many legitimate reasons to be skeptical of the shift to streaming in our media consumption. There's the decline of physical media, the shift from owning our own copies of the movies, shows, and music we love to paying to access them, access which can be lost at any time, even for things we've paid to buy. There's how much easier it is for streaming platforms to hide their viewership numbers. There's the ruthlessly capitalistic manner in which these streaming platforms curate their content libraries, removing works that they deem no longer worth the cost of hosting on their servers, banishing those works to obscurity, sometimes before they've even had a chance to find an audience. There's how much harder the streaming model and the various related working agreements makes it for the artists who actually create the films, shows, and music being streamed to get paid fairly for their work. And there are even more reasons than those. But one of the nice things about the abundance of streaming services and their insatiable hunger for content is how many movies and TV shows from the past are available to watch on demand. It's selfish of me to say, and it in no way invalidates the rest of what I just said, but it is pretty nice. There are shows I used to love that went off the air and more or less disappeared, except for the occasional syndicated or basic cable rerun that now I can watch whenever I want. Which brings me back to Highway to Heaven. If you've watched my stuff before, and you know what an unabashed progressive Democrat and atheist I am, it might surprise you to learn that Highway to Heaven is one of my favorite shows. If you've never seen the show, or it's been a while since you last watched it, that is, because if you know Highway to Heaven, not just by reputation, but by actually watching it, you'll also know the shocking secret to why I like it so much. The shocking secret that this series, about a friendly angel and his human best friend traveling the United States to give help and guidance to people in need, is woke as fuck. I saw a striking example of this recently when I watched an episode from Highway to Heaven's 5th and final season titled The Silent Bell. Originally airing in March of 1989, the episode sees Jonathan, the angel, played by Michael Landon, and Mark, Jonathan's human buddy, played by Victor French, take jobs at a preschool operated by a Christian church. Both the student body and the teaching staff of the school are ethnically and culturally diverse, including not only white Christians, but people of color, Muslims, and Jewish people. This diversity is a point of pride among the students and their parents, the teachers, and Tobias Bennett, the pastor who is the head of the school, and is presented in the show as an unambiguously good thing and something that should not be controversial. But since the episode needs a plot, the diversity of the school becomes controversial anyway when the council that governs the church that owns the school elects a new leader. And this new leader decides that from now on, things are going to change at this school. For one thing, Kester, the new council leader, orders that the curriculum of the school be adjusted so that it's more overtly Christian. Up to this point, despite being a nominally Christian school, operated by a Christian church, the instruction given the students was not explicitly Christian in character. That doesn't work for the new guy in charge. He wants to use the church school to indoctrinate the students into the church's religion. As he sees it, if they're not going to do that, why even have a school? To educate children? You fucking hippie. For another thing, Kester declares that from now on, the school should only employ Christians to be teachers. That means the non-Christian teachers, of whom there are several on staff, will have to be fired. Outraged, the entire teaching staff walks out in protest. Well, almost. Mark is all set to walk out too, but Jonathan says, nope, we have to stay. Trust me, I'm right on this one. And even though Mark doesn't really get it, he goes along with it because when Jonathan says, trust me, I'm right, you go along with it, since he's an angel who is literally on a mission from God. Jonathan's purpose in staying soon becomes clear: to push Tobias to stand up to Kester and the church council and do the right thing for his students, his teachers, and his own self-respect. On the first day after the walkout, a shaken Tobias thanks Jonathan for sticking around and tells him that not only have all the teachers except for him and Mark gone, but many students have also been withdrawn by their angry parents. Jonathan asks Tobias, "What are you going to tell the children about why so many of their classmates aren't here anymore? You built this school into a place where kids from all backgrounds could be together, where their differences weren't obstacles to their friendships. Now that's no longer true. So what are you going to tell them, huh? What are you going to tell them?" Tobias talks to the kids and tries to explain, but the kids are way ahead of him already. One of them comes right out with it and asks, "Are the teachers who aren't Christians going to hell when they die?" Tobias says, "No, of course not. People who aren't Christians are God's creatures just the same as Christians are, and God loves them just the same." The kids ask, "Then why won't God let them be teachers here anymore?" And Tobias struggles to explain that, telling the kids that it's not God who's stopping them from being teachers, it's the rules of the church, rules that they have to obey just the same as they obey God's laws. And the thing about their church is it's a Christian church, and they follow Jesus. Now the kids have got him, though. One of them asks, "But if Jesus was so important, why did he only come to one group of people? If God is God, and God can do anything, why didn't Jesus reveal himself to everyone everywhere?" These preschoolers are eating Tobias alive, so Jonathan, who along with Mark has been watching from the back of the classroom this whole time, speaks up to bail him out and says, "You know what? I bet if we all learned about each other's religions, the more we learned, the more we'd realize how much the same we are." And Tobias smiles and nods like, "Yeah, that sounds nice." And then Jonathan cuts Tobias's throat, rhetorically, it's not that kind of a show, by adding, "Well, I guess it's too late for that now." That messes Tobias up so bad he runs straight to the chapel, but Jonathan follows him to smack him around some more, again, rhetorically, and quite affably. Tobias confides in Jonathan that he knows that standing up to Kester and fighting for his non-Christian teachers and students is the right thing to do, but he's afraid to do it for the sake of his family. He doesn't want to lose his job, his position in the church, and throw their lives into turmoil. Jonathan says, "Maybe you should talk to the boss." Tobias says, "Talk to Kester? That won't do any good." And Jonathan says, "Kester? I meant your real boss. I thought you worked for God." Tobias prays about it, and he finds the strength to do what he's always known he should do. The next Sunday, he uses his sermon to the congregation to share his struggles with the new policies imposed by Kester and the council, and to announce what he intends to do about the school. He will do as the council says, and teach Christianity at the school. But this will be an act of malicious compliance, as not only Christianity, but Judaism and Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism and more will all be taught as well, so that the children can learn to understand and appreciate each other. And, Tobias declares, all these things will be taught by the full staff of the school, including the non-Christian teachers, assuming he can convince them to come back. He knows this isn't what the council wants, but a church is made up of people, not committees. Committees are people, my friend. Anyway, I know what he means. So Tobias leaves it up to his congregation to decide. Will they support him and his plan for the school, or will they crumple to the will of the council like the weak-willed moral cowards they are? Of course, because this is Highway to Heaven, a life-affirming fantasy series, the congregation backs Tobias up, and in response, Kester backs down. It's a happy ending. Pluralism lives! Watching this episode today in the context of everything, it plays as startlingly progressive. It shouldn't be. None of its ideas ought to be seen as radical today, nor should they have been in 1989, but compared to most of what's on TV now, this is an episode where religious and cultural diversity are presented as good and necessary things that are worth fighting for. This is an episode where a preschool run by a Christian church teaches children from different faiths, employs teachers from different faiths, doesn't seek to indoctrinate the children into the church's religion, and is a treasured and celebrated part of the church and the larger community. But the episode goes even further than that. By making the preschool a church school, a Christian school, it suggests that this kind of diversity, including religious diversity, should be embraced and promoted by religious institutions themselves, and not just as a public relations stunt in conjunction with other religious institutions, not just as a polite but ultimately hollow gesture in support of peaceful coexistence, but as a genuine effort to learn about and understand and respect people of different faiths than their own. Not only that, the villain, Kester, is a guy whose primary offense is wanting the school operated by his Christian church to employ Christian teachers to teach Christianity to the students, which, if you think about it, isn't even that unreasonable of an expectation. I'm an atheist, and I'm not an advocate for any kind of single religion education, whether it's Christian or Jewish or Islamic or anything else. But a Christian church running a school where Christians teach Christianity doesn't strike me as all that unusual. But the episode presents Kester as humorless, callous, inflexible, and intolerant. He's not tragic. He's not presented as misguided or suffering. He's not there to see the light and be redeemed. He's the embodiment of the opposition to diversity, inclusion, and religious pluralism, and he's a dick. And when Tobias, after some nudging from Jonathan, finally decides to defy Kester and stand up for the diverse and multi-faith nature of the school, he's depicted as doing God's will. We'd probably infer this anyway, but just in case there's any ambiguity, the episode makes this particular point as explicitly as possible without just having God appear on screen. After Tobias initially caves to Kester's demands and the teachers walk out, the school bell mysteriously stops ringing. Mark checks it out and insists that there's nothing wrong with the bell. It should ring, but whenever he tries to ring it, no sound comes out. Then, at the end of the episode, after the church has voted to support Tobias in returning the school to its previous multi-faith, multicultural form, the bell begins to ring. The message is clear. God himself opposes Kester's narrow sectarian approach and is on the side of diversity and inclusion. I'm sure there were people who didn't like this in 1989. For as long as there has been television, there have been religious zealots with sticks up their asses about what's on television. I'm sure the diversity of the school and the negative portrayal of Kester rubbed certain kinds of Christians the wrong way when they saw it 36 years ago. But this episode aired on national broadcast television without incident. There were no protests of note, so far as I can tell. There were no major efforts to get the show canceled or to ruin the careers of anyone associated with it. It seems to have been utterly uncontroversial. Now imagine if this exact same episode were produced and released today. Would it be uncontroversial? Or would it be the subject of righteously indignant stories on Fox News and histrionic YouTube videos and social media threads for weeks on end? How many conservative Christians would take it as a personal attack, cite it as evidence that Hollywood hates their faith? How many racist right-wingers would denounce it as part of a nefarious effort to undermine the traditional character of white Christian America and replace it with forced diversity and religious and moral relativism? How many professional angry people would absolutely lose their shit in public over it? If I quiet my mind and focus and use my imagination a bit, I can almost hear the disingenuous, high-pitched whining of Ben Shapiro. Wait, do you hear that? I think my Roomba is stuck. I'm coming, Tony! So what happened? Not with my Roomba. Tony's fine. All those chair legs around the dining room table are just a challenge. With our culture, how is it that this episode of Highway to Heaven could have aired in prime time on NBC without serious controversy or protest 2 months after President Ronald Reagan left office, but if it premiered today, it would blow up the internet? Much like Jonathan's repeated acts of violence against Tobias in the episode, I'm only asking the question rhetorically because I don't really know the answer. I know what happened, but I can't say I know how or why. Not exactly, anyway. I do think the prominence of social media in all of our lives nowadays has something to do with it. Just as streaming has a good side and a bad side, so does social media. Platforms like Facebook and Twitter, Reddit, TikTok, YouTube allow us to connect with each other, to form communities, to share our thoughts and feelings and experiences, find friends, share our work, find listeners, readers, and viewers. But those platforms also allow those with narrow views access to broad audiences that include many people who are far less skeptical and far more impressionable than perhaps they should be. For decades now, certain voices, having built large audiences primarily through online platforms, have been polluting our cultural discourse with grievance, paranoia, and misinformation, spreading racism, xenophobia, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, religious intolerance. Things that shouldn't be, and in a more sensible age wouldn't be seen as partisan political issues, are the subjects of bitter divisions, climate change, lack of affordable access to health care and education, the pervasiveness of gun violence in the United States, poverty. These are problems that affect people regardless of their political viewpoints. We might disagree on how best to address these problems, but we should all accept that the problems are real and important, and that we should do something about them. We should at least be able to start there. Highway to Heaven frequently engaged in social commentary. The issues the show dealt with were political, but they weren't treated as partisan political issues. And at the time, they weren't generally viewed that way, except by extremists who reflexively rejected anything they judged as being remotely progressive. In this present moment, it feels like those extremists are the ones driving the conversation. We've been told to fear and reject things we should all embrace. Think for a moment how much energy on a daily basis right-wingers devote to attacking diversity. And now consider how fundamentally absurd that is. Humanity is an inherently diverse species. We look different. We speak different languages. We live in different places. We come from different cultures. We follow different faiths. We think differently. We have different abilities. We have different advantages and disadvantages. We are a species of many colors, many nations, many genders, many sexualities. And yet we are all the same species. Forced diversity? How do you force diversity on human beings? It's who we are. We are many and one. To deny it is to deny ourselves. Why should we be afraid of diversity and multiculturalism and pluralism? Why should we regard them as threats? The only thing threatened by pluralism is totalitarianism. We're supposed to be against totalitarianism. Are we? Michael Landon, creator and star of Highway to Heaven, writer of many of the episodes, and director of almost all of the episodes, including this one, was the child of a Jewish father and a Catholic mother, and perhaps that accounts for the all-embracing view of religion presented in the show. But there's something else about Michael Landon that, in light of this episode, and Highway to Heaven as a series overall, seems almost impossible to reconcile with our current cultural moment. Michael Landon was a Republican. He supported the presidential campaigns of Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. Highway to Heaven was his show, and this episode, The Silent Bell, was, at least in large measure, his story. Can you imagine a Republican making something like this today? Compare this episode and the message of this episode to current media produced by people coming from a right-wing point of view. 40 years ago, Michael Landon, a conservative Republican, made this episode, which argues earnestly and without apology in favor of diversity and against the church intruding on education. Nowadays, conservatives make bitter, hateful, small-minded things like God's Not Dead and Lady Ballers. I guess they would consider that progress. Highway to Heaven comes across as pretty corny these days, and to be clear, there were lots of folks who found it corny in its day, too. Its view of the world and of people is often naive. Its proposed solutions to the problems it dramatizes are simplistic, and it's just so damn earnest. But for me, it will always have value as entertainment, as comfort, and as a reminder of some pretty important things. In the episode The Silent Bell, Kester, the new church council leader, might be a one-dimensional villain, but he still has a multitude of real-life counterparts, people who would rather pursue domination than understanding, who seek to drive us apart instead of pulling us together. Corny or not, Highway to Heaven is right. The last thing we should ever do is let the Kesters of the world have their way. And yeah, the series is painfully earnest, but you know what? I'll take earnest over cynical or apathetic any day. It's nice to have a show that calls us to be our better selves and tells us that the world would be a better place if we would just learn to embrace our diversity rather than fight it. Maybe if we heard that message more often, it would finally sink in.